Welcome to Non-Toxic. I'm Andrew Lewis.
And I'm Daniel Penny.
This week I have a short but sweet conversation with young Jordan Parker, aka JP Charisma. JP will forever hold the title as Non-Toxic's first ever TikToker guest, where he goes by BlackButterflyMan.
What would season 1 be without a TikToker? So, what's JP Charisma's story?
It's a cool one, and not at all what you'd expect from a young social media influencer. JP's not chasing trend videos or trying to do news roundups. All he's doing is native gardening, which is fantastic because I actually happen to be a native gardener myself.
Which is what exactly?
It's kind of crazy that we have to answer that question, but we do. Native gardening is when you landscape your yard or any garden space with plants that are native to the region where you live. So JP, he lives in Florida. So what he did is he cleared all these non-native plants that were growing in his yard and replaced them with plants that grow naturally in the Florida swamplands and forests all around him. Believe it or not, the vast majority of landscaping companies and even nurseries in the United States use flowers and shrubs that were at some point in time brought over from different states or countries. The early American aristocracy was notorious for bringing plants from everywhere. The problem is that these plants, they require, these days, a lot of fertilizer and water because they haven't taken millions of years to adapt to local conditions. On the other hand, native plants just need a lot less care. But for JP, he's particularly interested in raising awareness about how these plants can support butterfly populations and other pollinators, which is critical to keeping our ecosystems healthy.
Because without pollinators, there are no flowers and no food crops, right?
A good example are nut crops in California. You might have seen news stories about apiaries being transferred across the country in trucks where they're essentially rented out to almond farmers for a few weeks. So super important for certain crops.
Gotcha. So how exactly did JP get into butterflies and native gardening? It seems like a kind of unusual niche for TikTok. I'm used to seeing, get ready with me or which pants are swaggier.
Well, okay, definitely space for which pants are swaggier on TikTok. But it's a good question. I think it's one that JP answers kind of beautifully in our conversation. I encourage everyone to check out his TikToks or YouTube videos at JP Charisma. They're not just good watching and entertainment. They're definitely educational. It is, I think, really cool to see a young man, a young Black man at that, getting into the space and coming at it with a fresh perspective on social media where so many people are paying attention.
Nice. All right. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about native gardening and helping out our friends, the pollinators. Here's Andrew talking with JP Charisma.
JP, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I think I want to start with a really basic question, kind of an easy one, I'm sure. Can you explain how native plants sort of improve those problems like heat and other issues that are related to climate change? How are they better than non-native / invasive plant species?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing with native plants is that they've evolved and they've adapted to those spaces. So when you're planting native plants, you're not going to have to spend extra money on irrigation and, adding all those extra resources like fertilizer to keep this plant alive. This plant is going to thrive there. It's going to provide resources for wildlife and it's going to overall improve the quality of water as well as air quality. So when you're adding native plants, you're basically rebuilding something that was once there and was working tried and true to that area. So it's very important that we continue to add native plants in spaces that once was there. So it's just basically conservation, even at a gardening perspective.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of, losing wildlife and trying to regenerate the land, your focus is pollinators, right?
Okay, so I just will give you my origin story at this point. So basically, what happened with me is I, as a kid, I always loved butterflies. I knew milkweed was the host plant for the monarch butterfly. And so for my journey, I was just, COVID happened. and I was just walking and I saw these butterflies and they were white and black striped. Those are zebra longwings that I saw. And I was like, well, what is that butterfly's host plant? Like, I've got to figure that out. And so then I started like researching a little bit more about plants. I figured out that they use passion vine. And so like that kind of like stuck with me for a bit. I
Hmm.
went to this place called Little Red Wagon. I used to actually work there, and so working there for about a year and a half, I was able to learn a lot of information about native plants, and we really specialized in butterfly plants. So I learned a lot about herbaceous plants like wildflowers and grasses that are very crucial for butterflies because, they specialize in a lot of those plants when it comes to their host plants. But yeah, I learned like a lot of information working there. I read a lot of information from the Florida Native Plant Society. So anybody that's listening, if you want to become more aware of like what native plants are to your region, definitely go to a native nursery. Definitely join your native plant society. If you have problems with like getting native plants, you can always contact like your local university. Sometimes they'll have seed banks and swaps and stuff like that. Like in Florida, does like a native plant sale every year. And so there's a huge flux of people that just drive all the way to Gainesville to buy native plants. So that's another way to get access to native plants. And like for us, our Florida Native Plant Society has so much information on their website. And there's also the Florida Wildflower Foundation that I get a lot of information from too. So I literally just like sit there and read so much information about all these plants that attract these butterflies because I'm trying to get them in my garden. And I'm also trying to like learn how to garden with native plants. So that's kind of how I really learned all this stuff.
The thing that I'm most impressed about is knowing most of the or all of the scientific names of the plants that you're planting. Did you learn all of that stuff in this same process? I mean, that's an incredible amount of information in not that long of time.
Well, I mean, when you're a butterfly gardener, you end up becoming a botanist at this point. Like, you have to, because if you want like that specific plant, you've got to know the Latin name. Because like in this industry, it's like so many people are really just working. Like we live in a capitalistic society, honestly, and so many people are just working and they're just trying to make a living. They're not actually like aware of the fine details. And I'm very detailed orientated. So if I want like something specific, I'm gonna find out how to get it without making it so hard for people to, like, get what I need. You get what I'm saying? Like, I can
Yeah.
just put the scientific name there. If it's not the scientific name, then that's the wrong plant, you know? And so because I know this, like, I know exactly what it is that I'm purchasing. And I'm just,
I'm
like,
wondering.
generally speaking, like, I learned a lot of this because I'm passionate about it, you know? Like, when you're
Yeah.
passionate about something, you're gonna retain that information a lot better.
Why should people want to make sure that they're planting plants that are great for butterflies and pollinators as well? What is that added benefit that they provide for the overall yard slash garden environment?
The first thing is they're beautiful, they're gorgeous, like, when you have wildflowers in your yard, it just like, when you go outside and you see how pretty everything is, like, that helps your overall mood, when you're outside and you're seeing nice things, and I would say it just makes the spaces so much more appealing. Like, that's definitely one of the best benefits of it. Another reason why people add native plants to their yard is also some people are also food gardeners, so, like, if you're into, like, food sustainability, adding, wildflowers adds more pollinators, and those pollinators will be able to pollinate your crops and your food, and so you're actually increasing your yield, so that's another benefit of adding wildflowers to your yard. And then especially if they're native, you can actually zero scape. So if there's areas that, they have like a specific amount of water that they can use, and if they use native plants, then they don't even have to actually irrigate the landscape. So by adding those native plants, you are essentially like creating a space that is sustaining itself and you're not having to add all those inputs.
I should probably reveal here that I'm a big time native plant person as well. I got my house a couple years ago, and I've been like I watched your videos, and I completely relate to the transformation that you're going for. It's difficult work, digging up everything and transforming it. But it's kind of two questions. The first question is, you got to tell us what is wrong with a giant lawn of just grass.
So the biggest problem with that is you're basically creating like a desert for animals. There's literally like oh, there's like a couple butterflies that can use like St. Augustine grass, right? But like nothing else can really use like a lawn, you know? There's no resources for like people are like, well, what about the bees? What about the birds? Like the birds and the bees, they don't have anything in your lawn that they can actually use. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that honeybees are not native to the United States. They're actually from Europe, and so when we mean save the bees, we mean we need to save those native bees. So by, creating a lawn, you're essentially stripping the land of all of these resources. You're putting in this grass. You're spending so much money trying to maintain this lawn and make it look appealing. People are spraying, pesticides, herbicides, all these chemicals that, can cause cancer, like carcinogens. And essentially, when you are doing that, you're it's like I always say this, it's basically you're a colonist, like you're colonizing the land for some grass.
Today's episode of Non-Toxic is sponsored by Fruling, a New York-based snack company making next-level trail mix with heirloom varieties of nuts, berries, and whole-roasted cacao beans. Find Fruling products at select boutiques and health food stores or order directly online. Listeners can use the code NONTOXIC, that's in all caps, for 20% off orders at fruling.co/shop. Fruling, naturally delicious. So I think, shifting gears a little bit, it's no secret, I don't think, that in the botany world, in the horticultural world, at least in the United States, it seems to me it's a very white space, right? Even if a lot of the people, the landscapers, doing the actual work are not necessarily, white faces. So I really wanted to talk to you about, your experiences as a Black man getting into this, and not only getting into it and being passionate about it, but choosing to go ahead and promote it, choosing social media to spread the word. And I don't know if you want to use the word influencer or not. I don't know how you feel about that, but in a lot of ways, I mean, that's what you're doing, and that's a choice, to take that step further. So I'm curious about how you're thinking about that dynamic.
I mean, if we want to touch bases on like race for a second, I would definitely say like the industry that I'm in is definitely mainly white people. There's just a lot of Caucasians in the spaces that I'm in. And I mean, I don't really necessarily know why that is per se, but my perception of it is like a lot of these people that are in this space, they're more so like worried about like the environment. They have had a lot of opportunities to just think about, nature, and that's something that they enjoy. Whereas a lot of people of color don't have the same opportunities, like I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to even do this myself. And I see a lot of people of my color, they just don't have the same opportunities that I've had to even like be in these spaces. And it's also a lot of it has to do with culture and how people view certain things, So like for me, like I kind of just don't care about all that stuff. I just live like how I feel like living. I don't really like we were talking about like we're trying to talk about masculinity first, like as an example. Like I don't really care about masculinity or femininity. I'm just trying to live my true authentic self. And so like I could see why people of my skin aren't necessarily in this industry so much, because like the culture that's tied into it. I do see a lot of people of my color that are interested in native plants because of the medicinal benefits of it. And I think a lot of BIPOC community people definitely, when it comes to native plants, I would say they more so rely on native plants for like a source of food or, helping their life. Whereas, people who aren't of color are kind of just in it because they care about the environment per se. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how they're in this industry. Whereas like people, BIPOC community is kind of relying on these plants.
Hmm. That's a super interesting point. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a messaging issue, right? It's sort of the messaging for so long has just been this environmental issue, when there's a whole nother area, medicinal benefits and health benefits. I wanted to ask you, you posted something on Instagram the other day about basically, still loving cars. I scrolled back through your old videos, and you did a lot of like really great car reviews and that kind of thing. But you did mention a little bit about feeling that the car community is a little bit corny and filled with toxic masculinity. And I was kind of hoping you could talk a little bit about that dynamic, that difference, and just how gardening might sort of cut against. Do you feel like that those elements, those toxic masculinity elements of car culture sort of pushed you towards, gardening more? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm curious about if those elements have kind of, edged you closer to focusing your life on this new pursuit.
I wouldn't say it was that per se. The car like, being into cars is expensive. It is way
Yes.
more expensive than it is to be a native gardener. I mean, over time, like, you probably would stack up a lot of money in your garden to make a native garden, but, like, the initial investment to be, like, a someone in the car community is so expensive. But I will say that, like, the toxic masculinity in the car culture definitely pushed me away from trying to, be a part of that community and, participated participate more closely to it. I definitely, it pushed me like, I pushed back. Some examples of toxic masculinity include boasting about who has the better or faster car, publicly embarrassing people to show dominance, invalidating people because they can't drive manual or don't work on their own car, labeling people homophobic slurs for owning certain cars or using certain colors that they don't deem masculine. Like, I don't want like, there's people in the car community that I'm completely cool with. I have good connections with people in there. But like, when there's like an enthusiast, like I would not say that I'm like that 100% like hardcore car enthusiast. Like that's not me. Like I don't associate with that, especially with some of the ideologies that are also in it. But there is good people in it, but it's just I definitely don't associate with the culture as much as I do with the cars.
Yeah, I'm guessing there aren't heated arguments about who has better milkweed in the garden and
Oh, no, there is arguments. No, no, there is arguments about the good milkweed. Because the thing is with
oh, you got to tell me about this.
so, here's the thing. So, I don't know if you know this, but basically, there is this parasite called OE that harms the monarch butterfly. And
Mhm.
so, we have this whole savior complex of, "Oh, let's save the monarch." People think that they need to be raising monarch butterflies to save them when that's actually hurting them more than it's helping them. And so a lot of people, they don't even understand what OE is, and they're raising all these monarch butterflies that have a high percentage of OE, and it's actually harming their wild population of monarch butterflies because they're raising these butterflies. And they also have the non-native tropical milkweed that has an association of high OE percentages and monarch butterflies. And so people are trying to educate people on, what's the right milkweed to plant in your garden so that way we can help the monarch butterfly. And then people just get into these crazy arguments about, what's the right milkweed that you want to plant. But I always recommend people to, if they can get native milkweed, like if you can get it, get it. But if you can't, I try to recommend people to constantly chop back their non-native milkweed in the winter months if you're in a tropical region like California, Texas, or Florida, because with that non-native milkweed, you're basically harming wild populations of monarch butterflies.
Wow, that's super interesting. I did not know that. You mentioned the thing about OE and non-native milkweed, and it immediately made me think about, how you can go to the store and you buy the butterfly kits. And I'm guessing that they may not be the best thing. You feel like maybe you're helping the environment, but you're basically growing monarchs. Maybe a better thing you could do for the environment is just plant native milkweed.
That's my goal, that's my objective, and I mean, I'm kinda in the weird, like, gray area where I'm raising butterflies for educational purposes, that's why I do it, you know? Like, if you're, like, in a class and you wanna show these kids, the monarch butterfly because, you wanna make an impact so that way they care about these things, then I completely understand that, and I'll excuse that. But there's people that are literally so obsessed with, like, this, like, dopamine hit of releasing butterflies that they're raising and releasing, like, hundreds and hundreds of butterflies, and they're not even thinking about the environmental impacts that they're making in their area doing that.
Once again, it's like humans, intervening, and when the answer is really just doing what nature has already been doing.
Yes. Yes. It's just funny that, like, I'm so excited about these native plants when they're supposed to be in my backyard. It's, like, funny that it's like, "Oh my god, I'm seeing this plant." Yeah, you're supposed to be seeing this plant. It's supposed to be here. Like, it's just so funny how, like, we get so excited about these native plants when, like, in reality, they're native. They're supposed to be here. Like, it's not supposed to be something that is hard to see. Like, you should be able to see this and access this.
I'm wondering your advice for people, because I think a good amount of our listeners and just people in general, they live in cities, they live in apartments where they're renting, or maybe they just have tiny yards. What is your advice to them if they're super interested in this stuff, but they're just kind of like, how can I get involved with this? How can I help?
I mean, I would say it kinda depends, like, if you have, like, a balcony and you just put, like, a pot with some native plants in it, like, that's a huge impact, like, you're gonna make a positive impact in the world around you. Other ways that you could be involved is, being involved with your communities, like, there's a lot of community gardens that you could participate in, and you could help them start a pollinator garden. You could teach others about the importance of native plants. Funding organizations is very important because there's a lot of
Hmm.
organizations that are funding things. There's a lot of like grants that are out there and stuff like that. And so you could definitely like by helping these organizations, you could help them give grants for more native plant opportunities. So you don't necessarily have to have, your own space to contribute to this industry, but it
Hmm.
definitely helps and makes the experience more enjoyable if you can.
JP, where should folks go to check you out, learn more about what you got going on? Because you got a lot of stuff happening.
So if you want to know a little bit more about me, you can go on my website, www.jpcharisma.com. I have native plants available on there, as well as seeds, and eventually I'll also have merchandise on my site. I post a lot on TikTok mainly and Instagram, and I'm also posting on YouTube as well. I'm trying to expand on there. I have a couple of projects that I should be uploading July or August. So if you want to stay tuned, definitely check me out on YouTube. And if you want to contact me directly, go ahead and email me, and that's the best way to contact me.
Excellent. Well, JP Charisma, thank you for joining us. I thought I knew a lot, and you just taught me a lot more. So I'm going to take that with me into my own yard. I appreciate the insight. It was a great conversation. So thank you.
Non-Toxic is funded through your donations, and we could really use your help. So if you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to www.patreon.com/non-toxic-podcast and become a patron today.
Non-Toxic is sponsored by Fruling, a New York-based snack company making next-level trail mix. Music is by Nathan Sharp. Art is by Sam Creasy.
And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Substack, where you can get a monthly update on anything going on with the show. And please make sure to rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. But nothing does that better than telling somebody you know about it. Help us spread the word.